I think that there's real beauty in being inspired by someone or something. Whether that's someone inspired in some of the fields that we may want to go into, or whether it's people who are inspired by that we, may look up to in our everyday lives. But there is a difference between inspiration and imitation. And when in business and entertainment and all of these other things, there are certain elements that you want to keep in mind so that you are, you're taking, the inspiration and you're not mimicking what you're seeing and what you're hearing or whatever it is we may be doing. And that's what we're going to talk about in today's episode. I'd like to welcome you guys to episode 5. Okay. This is Mel Code. What's up, world? I'd like to welcome you guys back to another episode of Mel Code. We are in episode 5. This episode is called Inspiration, Not Imitation. Okay? And if you're new this week and just joining us, my name is Stefan Amir, aka Steph Melvin, and I'd like to welcome you to our show. Here on Mel Code, we decode and debunk approaches that may be stifling creativity or progression forward in our lives, our business, and so on. Anywho, so as I said in the beginning of the episode, we will be taking a look at some of the things that I feel as though are important that you want to keep in mind when, taking inspiration and converting it into something that you can call your own. All right. So with that being said, let's just hop right in. Okay. Code 1, the copycat complex. Identify the spark. I want you to recognize what draws you in about the work that you're observing or the energy that you're getting or whatever it is that is fueling the inspiration. I want you to observe what it is that really sticks out to you. And if you gotta, write a list, is it the tone? Is it the delivery? Are there visuals? What about these things are really sticking out to you? I don't want you to confuse your admiration with wanting to replicate. But we'll get more into that. But first, like I said, let's identify the spark. All right. The next thing you want to do is you want to filter it through self. Okay. What does this look and sound like with my spin on it, or in my own lens, or through my own eyes? Like, if I was to take this approach, how would it look for me? Someone may be able to spark what the interest is, right? But your execution can differ. That approach of filtering through self pretty much will become your authenticity check. The difference in between, what it is you're inspired by and what it is you're trying to create. You want to, my next point, translate, not transfer. Does that make sense? Translate, not transfer. Like, you're not carrying their style on. This is not like they're blessing you with the next generation to carry my style on. It's like you're not necessarily trying to do that, more so than translate the feeling, the impact in a way that only you can produce, something that's specific to you. So if you put these 3 things together, identify what it is that you're inspired by, filter it through yourself to make it authentic, and then to translate its energy and the message and the impact that you want to give. All right. Hopefully that makes sense. I want to do something a little bit different. I'm not going to do this all the time, just depends on the content, but for this particular breakdown, we'll apply the Amir method to each individual code, because I think that will definitely help kind of lay this out for people. I will get into what my inspiration was for this particular episode topic closer to the ending, but with that being said, let's apply the Amir method to the copycat complex. So as I said in code 1, what we're calling the copycat complex, you want to identify the spark, filter it through yourself or your authenticity check, and then you want to translate and not transfer. You mean carrying the energy and the essence and the feeling, but not the style per se. Okay? So, analyze. let's break down exactly what inspires you. Talk about the work, whether it's the tone, the visuals, the rhythm, not to copy as a whole, just study the parts, understanding what it is that you're inspired by in the first place. Okay, let's identify that. M, manifest. Okay, ask yourself what sparks align with your own story, your own goals. Imagine what it looks like filtered through you, through your own eyes. How, if I want to get into representing this cause, what does it mean to me? How do I relate to this? How does it impact me? How was I affected by this that inspires me to want to even be able to speak on it or build on it? Those kinds of things. All right. Then you want to implement. Experiment with your vision. Okay, remix your vibe, remix your ideas, put things into your own words, your own sounds, but to the point that the original is almost unidentifiable. Okay, and then reinvent. Evolve into something that feels brand new so that no one can trace it back to its original emulation. As I always said, that becomes your reinvent. Getting into this approach will really help lay a foundation and for, just helping understand where you stand separate from what or who you're being inspired by. And that's important. A lot of the times, especially with entertainers, the artist that they're inspired by bleeds onto them to the point that you don't recognize who their individual image is. And that's, to touch base on the main point, that is a very common one. Entertainers, I can get into several, but make a long story short, keeping your own identity separate from what you're inspired by is super key, whether that's in entertainment or any area of business. Be your own self, be your own brand, which is why we started where we started with these series and these episodes. It's identifying yourself. When you go through that filter self check, that goes into them morals, them all of the things we talked about in the last 4 previous episodes. All of those things from those lists play a role into, if I'm inspired by this, where do I stand morally, to deduce where I stand and what my approach will be to these next steps in my business and what I'm building towards. So now we'll jump into code 2. All right. The influence illusion. All right. The influence illusion. All right. Let's jump in. Diversify your inputs. All right. Pull inspiration from multiple areas. Whether that's music, books, television, fashion, whatever, commercials, conversations, it's all part of the creative designing process. So diversify your inputs, pull from different sources. Don't stay locked into one source, okay? Any experiences, conversations, all of them all play a benefit into development, okay? So yeah, diversify your inputs. I also encourage cross-pollination, okay? To blend those ideas and inputs and origins until they disappear. As I said in the previous part, when you cross-pollinate and you take these ideas, you put them in a pot, the original source of which you were originally inspired by fades away. You can no longer identify the original source. And that's really where you want to build your ideas to. You really want to build your ideas to a point where whatever you were inspired by originally disintegrates. Not just blend ideas and things, but also other people you may be around, other creatives, people you feel comfortable sharing your ideals with. Mix things in the pot. Not everyone is working solo dolo. I know there are people who work in groups and, have teams and whatever. Like, take those other ideas, take those other inputs, put it all in the pot. All of it is beneficial into creating something unique and special and individual to either self or brand. And I think that is a beautiful way to create in general. All right. And then I want to get into anchoring in your core values. And again, that goes back to what we've talked about in the previous episodes. When you go into those filters and those anchoring in of your core values, all of those things, all of those influences, you filter them through what you stand for. Once you have that foundation, it's really easy to figure out your footing with anything you want to step foot into, because you know what you're willing to compromise on, what you're not willing to compromise on. And you also know, talking to your audience or whoever it is you're inviting, they also know, is this someone I identify with, someone who sees things the way that I see or has a similar worldview to me? And when you have these things set in stone and you have your worldview and your outlook on life and perspective already set in foundation, it allows your audience to be able to see and know the kind of world that they're stepping into, that they it gives them that confirmation and that comfort. And you want to go into anything you're creating thinking about, not just how it relates to you and how it identifies to you, but the more rooted in you it is, the more it naturally will translate to your audience. There's not a lot of work to have to do when it's natural. Okay? Now let's apply the Amir method to this. Okay? AMIR, analyze, manifest, implement, reinvent. Analyze. You want to identify all of your sources of influence, whether it's the music, the books, the culture, the fashion, the conversations, all of the little bullet points I was randomly naming. You want to identify all of those sources. And then when you're moving into your manifesting, you want to visualize how they could intersect in your creative world instead of relying on just the one. So again, as we said, the cross-pollination, kind of the blending of the ideas. What does this look like if it was combined with this? And you feel me, you get where I'm going, and that'll bring you into your implement. Once you kind of have where you want to stand with that, you have your implement. You're actively bending your 2 or 3 influences into the project until the origin disappears. As I said, you want to mix your ideas and keep mixing ideas until whatever it was you were inspired by doesn't feel the same, but the message you're delivering does. And when you anchor in that blend with your core values, that becomes your reinvent, so that the final result is undeniably yours. Okay? All right. Code 3, the mirror trap. All right? The mirror trap. I get, for example, this is me relating into music. I get trends. I get how making music from a particular way or a particular sound or whatever, you may feel like you've lost the times, or with fashion, people may feel like they may lost the times. The goal is to not mimic, also to not feel the pressure of feeling like you have to or have to be close to in order to not feel left behind, which is a huge thing with musicians. And like I said, also dealing with the branding. The point is to not fall into that mirror trap. Spot the reflection. All right. Notice when your work feels like you're holding up a mirror to whatever you're inspired by instead of painting a new picture. Okay. That is the best way I can simplify that. Am I literally being this person with just not looking like them, or am I my own person giving my own message, but our messages align? You want to challenge the fear. Okay, like, am I following this because I actually believe in it, or am I following this because I don't want to be left out? You know what I mean? Like, I tend to do what I like and what feels right to me, and what I want to do in that time frame. Same way musically. So I really don't really step in with the fear of being left behind or getting left out. I do what feels right to me and what feels natural, because I naturally love or may naturally feel what it is. I would say with music, definitely, because obviously when it's something you feel, can't no one tell you how you feel. So naturally, I just put down what translates, point blank, period. And then rewrite that trend. All right. You use a trend as a raw material, but not as your final product. All right. You add your twist, you add your sauce, you add your riz. Their job was to inspire you enough to let you know that you have interest in doing something with this or about this. They've done their job. It's up to you to pick it up, spin, flip, run, and run with it your own way. Michael Jackson is the pinnacle of, what you consider pop entertainers to be, inspired by James Brown. But if you know, everyone in some way, shape, and form, if you're inspired by Michael, you're inspired by James. Like, it kind of goes with the trend of who inspired. But what Michael was able to build for himself was something that you give to Michael that you don't necessarily hold the same standard of James Brown to. James Brown is great for being James, for who James was, and whoever James was inspired by, that he made his own. That when we look at James Brown, we say, hey, that's James Brown, and that's everyone taking a little bit of what influenced them and then making it their own, to the point that they can only identify it as going to them, and that's kind of where you want to go with everything you're creating, no matter where you've been inspired from. Okay? Now let's apply the Amir method to this code 3, the mirror check. All right? A, analyze. I want you to notice when you're chasing a trend instead of leading from your own authenticity. It's important. From that point, I want you to work on the manifestation, okay? To reframe the trend as raw energy and how you could add your twist and add it differently. Remember, it's your starting point, it's the sauce, it's the icebreaker, but it's not the final result, okay? When you get into your implement, you're going to test in your little small ways. You're going to add the voice. You're going to add the content. You're going to add the style. You're going to add your formula. You're going to add everything into the pot in your implement. And what you come out with is hopefully unidentifiable from the original, and that will be your reinvent. Okay? So relating that back to our main point, you don't mimic the trend and to not get caught up in the fear of being left behind. You do what feels right to you authentically. Okay? If you've been following the show, then you know I tend to keep it honest by the end of the episodes. And one of the things that was really sticking out to me about this episode topic was trying to find my own footing, being this stepping into this realm of podcast hosting and kind of my more CEO-oriented career shift. And finding my identity, going to different podcasters, different artists that may have podcasts, and just kind of studying what I liked and what I wanted my approach to be or not to be, and finding my own realm of what it is I wanted to talk about, who was giving what kind of information. It was a little bit difficult for me to kind of find what it was, because I felt like there was a certain type that I needed to be, a certain personality a certain personality trait that I needed to keep tapping in on in order to be what I needed to be, which I realize now is totally not necessary. For example, I was just really under the impression in the beginning, pressuring myself about, having a visual podcast and being on YouTube. And I like the idea of developing a core audience that has the ability, has the attention span to just listen. And absorb information, take notes, ask questions. And don't get me wrong, YouTube videos are also great. But for me, being, one person and how I want to handle things, not being in front of the camera and doing it this way has helped the authenticity and the honesty and the transparency that I'm able to give off. It feels a lot more comfortable and a lot more personable than actually having a camera pointed at me. And I think that for the kind of information that I want to give out, the kind of dialogue, the kind of energy that I want to give, the camera kind of shifts that just innately. I kind of like this. Like I said, it feels intimate. It feels more personal and more personable. I literally feel as though I'm just having a phone conversation or, a regular conversation with, someone that I've met at a coffee shop on a random Wednesday. That's how talking to whoever's listening to this show feels. It feels very personal. And so with that said, this is just what I found to be better for my approach and how I want to deliver and how I want to give off my inspiration, how I want to connect with my community. And so I encourage everyone else to go on and find yours, whatever that might be and however that may look. All right. I hope you found this information helpful. Again, my name was Stefan Amir, aka Steph Melvin, and you have been tuned into another episode of Mel Code. And I will see you guys in the next episode, episode 6. Peace.